does not happen often when I sit here quoting ancient Greek philosophers. Don't worry, you've not mistuned. This is still me. This is still Dewbs Co. It's not artificial intelligence. But there's a quote that I've been pondering a lot recently. I don't know why, but it popped up somewhere. Aristotle once said that poverty is the parent of crime and revolution. And I found it quite interesting because I've spoken a lot recently. We've seen a lot of stuff go on in the press and beyond about crime and about some of the changes when it comes to the kind of crimes that people are committing. And I think about that quote and I think, is it true? Is there any truth in that poverty actually is the parent of crime? Or are people using life circumstances sometimes as basically an excuse just to behave badly? Your thoughts, Gary?
Well, I mean, firstly, Michelle, you're quoting Aristotle, and he didn't say poverty was the parent. He said it was the mother of crime, which sounds like he was a bit of a sexist in his time.
I thought he said
really,
parent. I will stand corrected though if I'm wrong.
Poverty is the mother of crime. That's the quote. Quite frankly, I think poverty is the mother, the father, probably the custodian and the guardian.
Quoting Greek philosophy for the first time in my life.
You got it wrong.
I can't believe that.
Well, you should have rung Boris. He would have definitely given you the right quote.
There you go. Anyway, carry on.
No, it's the mother, the father, the parent, the guardian, whatever, of crime. Anywhere in the civilised world, through the centuries, wherever there is crime and there's poverty, or poverty and inequality, then crime is prevalent. It doesn't tend to be as prevalent in richer communities, although, of course, it is done in different ways. I mean, you talk here about the cost of living crisis. I don't see there is a cost of living crisis. I think we are knee-deep in a cost of greed crisis, and I think that's what's driving an awful lot of the problems that society's facing at the moment.
So do you not feel that there are occasions where people will almost try and excuse, oh, yeah, he's doing this or he's out robbing that or whatever, but it's because, I don't know, they can't get a job here or the youth clubs have gone there? Or do you not think it actually just people desperate to excuse their own bad choices?
No, I don't think that's so. There will be an element of that. I mean, there's no debate there. There will be a small element of that, but it is a small element of that. I mean, if we look at behaviour and talking about the cost of greed crisis rather than the cost of living, look at the retail profits that are being posted at the moment. We've got the energy extortion, and that's what it is, certainly in this country. They're robbing people, and it's the poor that are suffering most. There's so many poor people now. You go into the toughest estates in inner city. So as I said to you earlier, we were up in Hull doing one of our Hope Hacks. I run the Hope Collective, which do Hope Hacks. 120 young people from Hull in a local theatre. And these are kids coming from, some of the toughest, most poverty-affected areas in Hull. And, some of the stories they're telling about the hardships their parents are going through. So I think we're in a cost of greed crisis. We need to look at that. We need to think about the behaviour of governments. We talk about the behaviour of citizens when I've never known, I'm 63 years old, I'll be 64 this year, I've never known a time when the government and the whole political estate was so fraught with bad behaviour. And it's like, it's a norm. So now we're wagging our fingers at kids. We're wagging our fingers at people.
It's top down.
Well, culture normally is.
What do you think?
Well, to very inaccurately paraphrase another big thinker, people make decisions and form their own destiny, but not always in circumstances of their own choosing. And I think the question really here is whether or not people have agency in the decisions they make. And I think there is a bit of a problem in the way that some of my comrades on the left, talk about working class poverty and crime, in that there is this kind of very patronising approach to people, which says we will excuse your bad behaviour or your actions. There's obviously a question of whether a lot of crime is actually immoral. I think we can make a distinction between someone robbing a bike for a jolly with someone robbing dinner for their kids. There are shades of grey in all of this. But, there is a kind of desire to forgive that by saying you couldn't really help it because all that, you were just driven by poverty. And we know that people make decisions, good or bad, all the time. Gary's also said that, obviously, a lot of the kind of criminality that I might be interested in also takes place in very rich households. It's not to say that simply having money means that you become a virtuous person. In fact, a lot of the time, quite the opposite. But I suppose, in relation to, there's some stories milling around this week about, for example, M&S taking stuff off the shelves and putting them back behind closed doors so that people won't nick them. this is, there has been an issue for a while. We were talking about this before we came on, that, for example, baby formula has been security tagged for as long as I can remember. Even things like cheese have been security tagged in shops. And so there is, I think, an interesting question to ask. Is it the fact that people can't afford things? And that is a question that I think most people should be interested in, with the cost of living crisis and food banks of that. Or is there something else going on with a kind of breakdown of the social contract in that? I think I'm from a working class family, and I think I was always brought up to understand that stealing was wrong, not just immorally, but because, it would be bad for you if you got caught. And I think the thing that worries me most is that there are lots of young people out there now who kind of don't care if they get caught. I'm thinking of the Mizzy phenomenon and
don't even get me started.
But there's, what are these? What is it about people turning to crime that they have lost all sense of not just their pride, but the fact that they have anything to lose? I think that's something that we should address.
See, I remember when I was a teenager, and I wasn't necessarily on the right side of the tracks, I must confess that. I was in with a not great crowd, and I used to go to this one particular pub. I won't name it, but it was on Hessel Road, if anyone is familiar with Hull. And they were guys that used to come in, and they were shoplifters, and they used to steal to order. Mm-hmm. So, people would be sitting there, there'd be queues of people, get me some cheese, get me some coffee, whatever. And it was just a trade. It just went on. And it wasn't because people couldn't afford cheese or a coffee. It was because actually they wanted to spend their last few quid on a few pints, a couple of pints or whatever, as opposed to having to spend it on the cheese or the coffee, because they could get that from this fella at a fraction of the cost. So I think that stuff has always kind of gone on. And I think that a lot of people, if they are struggling, you say about baby formula and stuff like that, there is an awful lot of help now. I remember when I was younger and we did struggle for money, and there didn't seem to be all this kind of food banks, you get the Healthy Start things where you get money on a card for baby formula and free vitamins. Well, there seems so much more help now.
This is for a whole other debate, but I do have to say that food banks aren't, in many food banks, you're not allowed to give out baby formula. Nope. That's a whole other, because there's an obsession with breastfeeding, and baby formula is like, you may as well give cocaine to your kid. It's kind of demonised to such an extent. Yep. That's for invite me on again, Michelle, and I'll talk to you about that for an hour. But I think there is also a kind of, there is unfortunately, we were talking about kind of breakdown of politics in the last section with the COVID inquiry. There has been a breakdown in working class politics and people being engaged in society. I think mostly because there's nothing to engage people, and politics is pretty dire at the moment. But it means that stuff starts to break down. The way people understand their life starts to break down. People start to not just lose hope, but start to stop kind of caring, I think. And I think that does then open up a space where people do things that they wouldn't have normally done. And now I'm sounding like I'm kind of apologising or patronising people. But you do have to ask the question, why is it, if there is higher levels of criminality, why is it that that's going on? It's not just because there's suddenly a huge more amounts of poverty, because, as you said, Michelle, that has always been, or for a long time, been a feature of the British political landscape. But what is the new thing that's going on, I think?
And I know a bit about the work that you do, and I hugely respect the work that you do, especially engaging people that are what I would call often on the wrong side of the tracks for various reasons. I've got a huge amount of respect for you. But I do wonder, because I do think that even in life, if your circumstances are really hard, if your parents, the wheels have come off, if you are in a tricky situation, I do believe that the thing that no one can take away from you is your choice. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be with you. I'm not going to make that decision. I will walk away from this. I will walk away from that. That is surely the last thing that we have for ourselves, isn't it? And do you think that enough young people in those situations make the right choices for themselves?
Well, we talk about other things that we can discuss at a future age, but I was part of a shoplifting gang when I was a kid, and that wasn't really a life choice that I would have chosen to make myself, but I was living rough in what used to be known as Cardboard City, where the IMAX is now. at 14 years old. So just to put some food inside myself, I started shoplifting with older boys that knew what they were doing and didn't tend to get us caught as much as I did. But it was a lifestyle choice. I needed to eat. I had come through a very traumatic experience with my parents in a very messy divorce. My father was a policeman. I was apparently cut out for a life in the police. Didn't quite work out that way. And I say, ended up living rough for nearly 2 years as a teenager. So yeah, I was involved in making decisions that I wouldn't have chosen to have made.
But then you were also clearly involved in making the right decisions and choices as well.
Well, I got lucky in as much as I had a child at quite a young age, and that created a situation where I had to grow up very, very quickly at 19. And yeah, I got myself right back on track. But I do understand and I do empathise totally with these kids that are now living in the poorer areas of the country. And it's a big, big issue in London, because, of course, in London, we've not just got poverty on a scale as high as any other major city in London now, in Europe now, but we've got inequalities. I mean, gentrification of every single poor area in London, where that immediately creates a drug market. You know, there's a lot of things that aren't really thought through here by the adult establishment, because they're creating a terrain where actually crime is actually almost more like the norm.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound really heartless, but I do think actually one of the things that creates a drug community is young people wanting fast cash. So they sit there, they realise, you know what, I can cycle around chucking these bags of whatever here, there and everywhere, I can make a fortune, or I can get a job and have to graft really quite hard and get a fraction of the money. I don't know if I'm being harsh. You guys, you don't beat around the bush at home. I'm sure you'll tell me